Over the past decades, Nintendo has built up a reputation for making games the whole family can enjoy. And so, fans were pretty shocked when the company announced Emio, the Smiling Man, a new horror detective game rated M or 18 here in Europe. That's pretty unprecedented. Occasionally, Nintendo publishes games like Bayonetta, which are made by other companies. But Emio's story came straight from one of Nintendo's most prolific game creators, Yoshio Sakamoto, the man behind the Metroid series. So, in order to understand what exactly is going on here, we need to go back 30 years and take a look at the fascinating history of the Famicom Detective Club series, which Emio is a part of. You might know a little about Famicom Detective Club. Perhaps you've played one or both of these games, but I guarantee there's so much you don't know about this bizarre and totally family-unfriendly series. Even back in 1989, these games were some of the scariest, most adult games on the NES console. So in this video, we'll explore the history of Famicom Detective Club, why Nintendo would ever make a series of adult horror games, what happened to the series for the past 30 years, and how Famicom Detective Club was rescued from the brink of death. Part 1. Not a visual novel. So, before we talk about Famicom Detective Club, I need to set the scene a little. You might have heard of Yuji Horii, the creator of the Dragon Quest series. Dragon Quest is widely regarded as the first ever JRPG. It set in place the conventions you find in JRPGs to this very day. But what you might not have known is that Yuji Horii didn't create one genre, he created two. In 1983, Horii created a game called The Portopia Serial Murder Case. This one game birthed the Japanese adventure game craze. Old text-based adventures had players type in commands, things like look left or investigate bookshelf and so on. Horii had the idea of giving players a list of commands they could select from instead. The basic flow of the game was the same, but by creating this command list and assigning a portion of the screen to graphics, Yuji Horii turned text-based adventures into something much more dynamic and, well, fun to play. So before we go further, there's an important area of confusion to clear up. A lot of international players of games like Ace Attorney, Danganronpa, and Famicom Detective Club call these games visual novels, but that's not quite the correct term. A visual novel is a game which essentially has no gameplay. You can sometimes select dialogue options to get a different ending, but these games are, at their core, novels. The most famous example is probably Steins Gate, but there's loads of visual novels out there. On the other hand, something like Ace Attorney is known as an adventure game. Although for large chunks of the game you are reading dialogue boxes, there's puzzle-solving gameplay too. In Ace Attorney and Danganronpa, you spot contradictions in testimony. In 999 and other Zero Escape games, you figure out how to escape the room you're in. So, after the release of the Portopia Serial Murder Case in 1983, these adventure games became really popular in Japan. Most major game developers put out their own detective-style adventure games to try and compete with Portopia. Yuji Horii himself created 2 follow-ups. And that brings us to Nintendo, and to a game designer called Yoshio Sakamoto. When I first played the Portopia Serial Murder Case, I was blown away. I thought that feeling of progressing through the story was really captivating. Part 2. Corpse Village. So, although Yoshio Sakamoto was really inspired by Portopia, going as far to say, I'd like to try making a game like this, it wasn't actually Sakamoto who suggested Nintendo create their own Portopia-style adventure game. No, according to Satoru Okada, who directed the first Famicom Detective Club game, The idea actually came from another company entirely, Toes. If you've not heard of Toes, that's no surprise, as they're what's known as a ghost developer. In the 1980s and 90s, Toes helped Nintendo develop hundreds of games, but their name was never in the credits. Because of that, it's still unknown just how many games Toes developed with Nintendo. And so, one day, the president of Toes came to Nintendo with an idea. He'd just played an English text-adventure game called Circus, and he felt inspired to make an adventure game together with Nintendo. Nintendo agreed to the idea and assembled a small team. The producer of the project was Gunpei Yokoi, who you might know as the creator of the Game Boy. Yokoi came up with the title Famicom Shonen Tanteidan, which can be translated roughly as Young Famicom Detectives. It was then up to the developers at Nintendo and Toes to come up with a game which would fit the title. Feeling a little out of their depth, the team members began searching for an established mystery author to write the game's script. They even talked to Shigesato Itoi, the creator of Earthbound, about taking on the role of writer. But none of the team's efforts went anywhere, and the project started losing steam. According to Yoshio Sakamoto, it didn't go very well at first because the company we were working with hadn't thought about creating something which focused on the development of the story. I personally thought it would be better to make something like Portopia, something with a tight story that would surprise players and take them through highs and lows of joy and sorrow. That's why I went to my superior at the time and asked, can I try writing the scenario for this game? Now, Sakamoto had never written a full adventure game script before. He knew very little about detective or mystery stories. But Gunpei Yokoi decided to take a chance on him nonetheless. Toes had suggested a story about a boy who'd lost his memory, and Sakamoto decided to flesh that out into a full script. According to Sakamoto, there are lots of engaging mystery novels out there, but if you experienced them in game form, they wouldn't be as interesting. In the context of a game, I think a complex and detailed plot demands too much of the player, so I wrote a scenario tailored specifically to the format. Originally, Yoshio Sakamoto's script was titled Shikabane no Mura, which means Corpse Village, but eventually the title was changed to Famicom Detective Club: The Missing Heir. For the game box, Nintendo worked with an external illustrator. However, the team wasn't happy with the final result. The quality wasn't very good, said writer Toru Osawa. Nevertheless, by April 1988, it was time for the game to be released, or at least half of the game. You see, Famicom Detective Club: The Missing Heir wasn't a regular NES or Famicom game, instead being released for the Famicom Disk System. So let's talk a little about what that means. So, the Famicom Disk System was a Japan-exclusive peripheral for the Famicom console. It could be attached to the bottom, just like so. Now, using the disk system, customers could buy games in the form of floppy disks, rather than traditional game cartridges. This meant cheaper games, more storage space, better music, and more. But even with all that extra space, Famicom Detective Club was just too big to fit on a single disc. And so, the game was split in half, with customers having to buy each half separately. Not only that, but there was a month-and-a-half gap between Part 1 and Part 2. Imagine getting to the most climactic part of the story, and then having to wait more than a month to see what happens next. Still, The Missing Heir proved to be a success for Nintendo. Part 1 sold over 500,000 copies, and Part 2 sold over 400,000. That's pretty impressive, considering the game was only available to Japanese audiences. And this game clearly left a lasting legacy. In July of 2024, when Japanese players were asked what they think of when they think about the Famicom Detective Club: The Missing Heir was number 5 on the list. In fact, it seems there was only one person who wasn't completely happy with the game: Yoshio Sakamoto himself. With the missing heir, Sakamoto explained, the protagonist had amnesia, the setup was sketchy, initially there wasn't too much of a story, and it wasn't glamorous. And so Sakamoto decided he would make a sequel. Part 3. Rumors, Legends, Curses. According to Yoshio Sakamoto, when we made Famicom Detective Club 2, since there were still things left to do over from the first game, I said, let me do this, and begged my boss to allow it. That's the degree of freedom we had. Now, like I said, the first Famicom Detective Club was a success. It was looked upon positively by critics, it sold well, but it didn't fully line up with what Sakamoto himself wanted to do with the genre. The story had been inspired by detective stories, in particular the Kosuke Kindaichi series, Japan's most famous series of detective novels. But when he wrote the game's story, Sakamoto had only read 2 Kindaichi books. 1.5 actually, he hadn't finished the second. Sakamoto had much more of an interest in horror stories than more traditional Agatha Christie-style mysteries. He said in an interview, "In those days, I really liked horror, and I also really liked ghost stories about high school. Because of that, ideas blossomed, and I wanted to make a horror story set at an academy." And this set into motion the plot of Famicom Detective Club, The Girl Who Stands Behind. Now, not only did Sakamoto want to outdo the previous game's story, but the whole team had aspects they wanted to improve upon. The first game's soundtrack hadn't been composed by any Nintendo composer, but instead by a woman named Hiromi from outside the company. The soundtrack turned out great, but for this second game, songwriting duties were taken over by veteran Nintendo composer Kenji Yamamoto, best known for his work on the Metroid series. I had lots of feelings concerning the music, says Yoshio Sakamoto, and it was necessary for us to have an internal composer. Near the end of the game, Sakamoto wanted the music to really make players jump, and Kenji Yamamoto came up with a clever trick to help pull that off. Normally, games would play their music at full volume, but up until that final scene, Yamamoto played the music at around half volume. Players would turn their TV sound up, and then during this dramatic scene, the sound would suddenly play at full volume, knocking players out of their seats. And the final improvement was the box art. Director Toru Osawa said, "I drew the rough sketch of The Girl Who Stands Behind. I also did the layout. It was completed by a skilled artist." In other words, there would be no chance of ending up with a design that the whole dev team hated this time around. And so, like The Missing Heir, The Girl Who Stands Behind was released in 2 parts, one in May and one in June of 1989. This game too proved to be a real hit. One reviewer wrote, "The sense of fear is palpable, and that the wait between part 1 and 2 was agonizing." But after 1989, Sakamoto moved on from the Famicom Detective Club series. He began working on Game Boy games like Balloon Kid, X, and The Frog for Whom the Bell Tolls, before writing and directing arguably his greatest achievement, Super Metroid. But while all of that was going on, the Detective Club series would soon receive a new entry. This new game would have a different writer, a different director, and would look and sound unlike any other game in the series. Part 4, The Lost Game. So, let's talk about the Satellaview, shall we? If you've not come across it before, the Satellaview is a Japan-exclusive peripheral for the Super Famicom, which lets the console receive satellite broadcasts of game data and audio. The history of this thing is pretty interesting. Nintendo bought a stake in a struggling Japanese broadcaster called St. Giga. And so, in 1995, Nintendo came up with the Satellaview add-on to help revitalize St. Giga. All of the Satellaview's satellite and broadcasting tech was run by the St. Giga company. One of the biggest draws to the service was SoundLink Games. These games synchronized with a live audio broadcast that was transmitted in order to provide high-quality music and voice acting in these SNES games. The first Soundlink game was a remake of the original Legend of Zelda. There were also Fire Emblem, Dragon Quest, and Excitebike Soundlink games. However, by 1997, the Satellaview was struggling a bit. According to one Japanese owner of the peripheral, I personally had a lot of fun with the Satellaview and was glad I got one at the time, but looking back, that excitement only lasted about a year and a half after the service started. One by one, celebrity radio programs ended, and the number of new game broadcasts went down as reruns increased. In that situation, when the news of a new Famicom Detective Club game came in '97, I was really happy, and I think it became a hot topic among game fans too. So this new game was not called Famicom Detective Club, but instead BS Detective Club, with BS standing for Broadcast Satellite. BS Detective Club, Lost Memories in the Snow. Here's the game poster. Rather than controlling the nameless protagonist as before, you play as your sidekick from the previous games, Ayumi Tachibana. But with this being a Soundlink game, the gameplay and structure took a pretty different form than the previous titles. So, like all Soundlink games, you could only play during specific time slots when the game was being broadcast, or rather when the game's audio was being broadcast. The gameplay had to essentially line itself up with a live radio broadcast, which contained music and voice acting. Chosen to play the character of Ayumi Tachibana was famous voice actress Yuko Minaguchi. You might know Minaguchi as Sailor Saturn from the Sailor Moon series, or as Vidal from Dragon Ball. She's appeared in so many long-running shows like One Piece, Demon Slayer, Detective Conan. But if the broadcast was pre-recorded and every player across Japan was hearing the same thing, surely the voice acting wouldn't line up with the actual dialogue that was on screen. Well, that's where the game's unusual structure comes in. With Lost Memories in the Snow, players have almost no control over what happens in the story. A set of pre-scripted events plays out when you first boot the game, and dialogue from these sections matches up with voice acting broadcast over satellite radio. We'll call these event sections. Then you get a bit of time to do some investigating of your own. You can talk to characters, investigate crime scenes, and view family trees. There's no voice acting in these sections because you, the player, have the freedom to play how you like. Let's call these investigation sections. And then, once a predetermined time has passed, the story will start progressing by itself, lining up with the radio broadcast once more, with voice acting returning. Essentially, the whole game is split between these event sections, which every player sees at the same time, and short investigation sections, which you have control over. This structure means that even if you don't press a single button, the story will still progress by itself, and you'll eventually see the game's ending at the exact same time as someone who didn't rest until they'd inspected every suspicious-looking nook and cranny. If that sounds strange to you, yeah, it is. There was a pretty major trade-off made here between having voice acting and letting the player investigate with freedom. The story was broadcast in 3 parts, with each lasting less than an hour. That's pretty short. And the strange structure isn't the only reason this game feels unlike the previous 2 titles. This is the only game in the series which wasn't written by Yoshio Sakamoto. In fact, this game was developed by a completely different department within Nintendo. The previous 2 games had been developed by Nintendo R&D 1, the division responsible for Metroid and Kid Icarus, which Yoshio Sakamoto was a part of. Lost Memories in the Snow was instead developed by Nintendo R&D 2, normally responsible for hardware. R&D 2 was responsible for the Satellaview peripheral, so it makes sense that they'd be the ones to make this new Satellaview Detective Club game. But with a new writer and director, Lost Memories in the Snow feels different to the previous games in the series. only Kenji Yamamoto, composer of The Girl Who Stands Behind, returned to write the music, and Yoshio Sakamoto is credited as producer. How involved he was is hard to know, but my guess is not very. The final result was mixed. According to one Japanese fan, the game's not as interesting as the first two. The flow of the story and how it ends feel like bad copycats of the first two games, and there's no surprises or excitement. That's pretty scathing, but one English language review said that the plot has a solid foundation, and the focus on Ayumi was a good decision. Clearly, the game's creators had high hopes for their new title. On the flyer advertising BS Detective Club, there's a notice which says, BS Detective Club 2, submit your ideas for a perfect crime or interesting story, etc., and we'll turn those into a game. That sounds like a pretty interesting idea, but with the Satellaview steadily bleeding users, no more Detective Club games were produced for the system. That puts Lost Memories in the Snow in a pretty lonely position. Because you could only play SoundLink games during the time slot when they were broadcast, nowadays this game is unplayable. Fans have managed to save the game's data, but the live audio feed is completely gone. The only record of what it would have been like to play the game is old VHS videos recorded at the time. But in 1997, Famicom Detective Club's future looked hopeful. Lost Memories in the Snow had just been released, with a sequel promised, and around that same time, Nintendo greenlit another Famicom Detective Club game, but not on the Satellaview. And this time, Yoshio Sakamoto would be firmly at the helm. Part 5. A fresh coat of paint. So let's take a quick step back. The first two Famicom Detective Club games were released on hardware that never made it out of Japan, the Famicom Disk System. Then the third game, Lost Memories in the Snow, was also on an obscure piece of Japanese hardware, the Satellaview. And it turns out the next Famicom Detective Club game was also released on an obscure Japanese service called Nintendo Power. You've probably never heard of Nintendo Power. Well, actually, you likely have heard of Nintendo Power, the famous American Nintendo magazine. But in Japan in the 1990s, there was a completely different service called Nintendo Power, which let users rewrite data on Super Famicom game cartridges. So normally, every time you wanted to play a game on your Super Famicom console, you'd have to buy a game cartridge. These could be expensive, and in Japan at the time, buying second-hand games was actually illegal. Thus, Nintendo created a service called Nintendo Power. You first bought this rewritable game cartridge, and then you could take it to your nearest Lawson's convenience store and download a game for a much cheaper price. Most Nintendo Power games were just old Super Famicom releases, like Super Mario World or A Link to the Past. But there were a few exclusive games you could only get using the Nintendo Power service, and one of them was a Super Famicom remake of The Girl Who Stands Behind. We ended up porting the second game to Super Famicom, but that turned out to be a little tricky, said Yoshio Sakamoto. The unique feel or atmosphere can't necessarily be preserved, even if the technology behind the visuals or sound has improved. I think a lot of players were unsettled by the click, click, click of the disc loading of the original version, that sort of thing. Nevertheless, going back and revisiting The Girl Who Stands Behind gave Sakamoto a chance to make some changes and sand off some of the rough edges. For instance, halfway through the game, there was a section where the player had to find their way through a maze-like cityscape. Sakamoto replaced it with a simple montage. He worked with an editor who helped him go through all of the game's lines of dialogue and make changes. And on April 1st, 1998, The Girl Who Stands Behind remake was made available on the Nintendo Power service. Players could visit their local convenience store to download this remake of a Famicom classic. By all accounts, the remake was a hit with Famicom Detective Club fans. The future of this series looked rosy. So, when would Nintendo release their next Famicom Detective Club game? Oh. Part 6, The Hiatus. So, for over 20 years, the Famicom Detective Club series lay entirely dormant, or at least almost entirely dormant. In 2004, both of the original Famicom games were ported to the GBA, and this marked a first for the series. The Girl Who Stands Behind was rated 15. You see, prior to 2002, Japan didn't have an age rating board for video games. After receiving this rating, Nintendo considered changing the contents of The Girl Who Stands Behind, but eventually they decided to leave it be, 15 or not. In the years since, the Wii, Wii U, and 3DS virtual consoles all included both The Missing Heir and The Girl Who Stands Behind, although not always both versions. But other than these scattered re-releases, the Famicom Detective Club series seemed to have ended. Yoshio Sakamoto had risen through the ranks of Nintendo and was busy producing games in the Metroid and WarioWare series. But while Sakamoto didn't seem to have much interest in bringing back this old series of his, another company did. That company was Mages, one of the most prolific visual novel studios in all of Japan. Before we go on, if you're enjoying this video, then consider supporting my channel on Patreon. It's the best way to help me make long-form videos like this one that you're watching right now. Anyway, back onto the video. Part 7, A Mage's Spell. So, there's a handful of really respected visual novel game studios in Japan, and one of them is Mages. Mages is best known for their science adventure series, in particular the game Steins Gate. Plenty of people who've never touched a visual novel in their life have heard of Steins Gate, thanks to its extremely popular anime adaptation. Now, one of the directors at Mages is a guy called Makoto Asada. Asada had long been a fan of the Famicom Detective Club games. He'd played them as a child, and for a long time had been wishing for a modern remake of the first two titles. One day, during a meeting with a representative from Nintendo, Makoto Asada suggested that Mages and Nintendo partner up to produce remakes of Famicom Detective Club. When they next met, Asada brought a project proposal document he'd written up, outlining how these remakes could look. But the Nintendo representative said, "It's hard to get the idea across in a proposal, isn't it?" And so Makoto Asada had an idea. He and his team at Mages would put together a short demo of their remake. Nintendo knew nothing about this secret project, and according to Asada himself, "I started out working on it alone in my spare time." Eventually though, more and more developers at Mages were brought on to work on this short demo. By the end, it even had full voice acting. Mages had a voice acting talent division, so Asada had a few of those actors come and record lines of dialogue for the demo. When Sakamoto was shown this demo, he was pretty surprised. I was shown a video of the test version in action. It already looked pretty polished, and I could sense Asada's passion for the series. So from that moment on, I frankly thought, I want to take on this project. So at Mages, many developers were already fans of the original Famicom Detective Club games, and they were pretty set on not changing the games themselves, the dialogue, the text prompts and so on, but everything else was up for grabs. Mages would give these games a modern coat of paint. Our goal for the project was to create the pinnacle of 2D text adventure games, said Makoto Asada. Even though the stories of Famicom Detective Club aren't that long, the games took 3 times the resources of a regular Mages game. A big part of that is the way that these games look. The way graphics work in a regular text adventure game like Ace Attorney is pretty simple. You have a bunch of character sprites and a set of backgrounds. You can swap the backgrounds to change location and change the specific character animation to suit the scene. That way, you can tell a story without using too many resources. But for their modern remakes, Mages wanted to do something different. The vast majority of scenes would have dedicated art drawn up for them. Were the main characters talking at a coffee shop? Mages drew up art of these characters sat at their seats from multiple angles, interviewing the butler, the doctor, talking to Ayumi. All of these scenes have unique art and unique animations. That meant a lot of work for Mages, and also not a lot of flexibility. If you want to change a character's design, you can't just edit their sprite. You need to redraw every single scene they appear in. So to eliminate the possibility of needing to do that, Mages and Nintendo had to nail down each character design before any art was drawn up. According to Makoto Asada, in the early stages of development, we talked with Sakamoto-san and worked on what the character designs would look like. If you include the rejected designs, I think we drew up around 120 characters total. Another key step was the voices. In an early meeting with Yoshio Sakamoto, the game's dev team asked if he had any thoughts about the voice cast. Apparently, Sakamoto had just one request. He wanted Yuko Minaguchi to voice Ayumi, just as she had done back on the Satellaview.
なんだとは失礼ね。一度行方不明になったんだから心配して当然でしょ?
For the other characters, Asada and his team considered many different voice actors. With the main character in particular, they wanted to pick someone from the same generation as Yuko Minaguchi, who could do a good teenage boy voice. They picked Megumi Ogata, who's known for her deep voice and often voices male characters or tomboys. You might know her as Shinji from Neon Genesis Evangelion, Sailor Uranus from Sailor Moon, and Makoto Naegi from Danganronpa.
ここまで分かったことを整理して推理してみたいんだ。
With casting in place and character designs nailed down, it was time for Mages to knuckle down and get both games finished, starting with The Missing Heir and then moving on to The Girl Who Stands Behind. The games were announced in a Japanese Nintendo Direct in 2019 and would be released the following year. At this point, there was nothing that could get in Mage's way. Nothing except for an unprecedented global health event.
China has identified the cause of the
mysterious new virus.
coronavirus.
So, with COVID came lockdowns, and Mage's staff had to figure out how to continue working on the games from the safety of their own homes. This was a huge adjustment. Makoto Asada said, "We were in the middle of development when the COVID pandemic hit, and switching to remote working midway through the project was hard. I think that's why the game launch was delayed." Yes, you see, in 2020, Nintendo announced that they'd be delaying the launch of the remakes until 2021. And in February of that year, Nintendo debuted the following trailer.
Put your sleuthing skills to the test in two classic murder mystery games. Famicom Detective Club, The Missing Heir, and Famicom Detective Club, The Girl Who Stands Behind, are coming to North America for the first time.
So, not only did this delay give Mages time to finish off and polish up their remakes, but Nintendo decided to localize them into English as well. For the first time ever, the Famicom Detective Club series wasn't exclusive to Japan.
なんだとは失礼ね。
So, the game's audio was still in Japanese, it was just the subtitles that were translated. And that's totally fine, these games have a strong Japanese flavour. I personally would find it weird to hear English voices in these stories. But that combined with the fact that outside of Japan the games were only available digitally suggests Nintendo didn't exactly expect them to fly off the shelves. So, were they right? How did these games sell? Well, according to Makoto Asada, the games were very well received overseas, and we were able to sell a good number of copies. Within Japan, Yoshio Sakamoto said he saw a lot of fans of the original games who were happy with the remakes, and gradually more players who'd never tried the previous games ended up buying and enjoying the remakes too, he said. Thanks to Nintendo and their developers, we were able to make the best game we possibly could. But looking back, I think we were a little reckless. Making another game this good or even better is going to be difficult. However, we have accumulated a lot of know-how, and if possible, I'd like to use those skills to make a new Famicom Detective Club game. Part 8. In with the new. That brings us to 2024, a full 36 years after Yoshio Sakamoto started work on the first Famicom Detective Club game. While Mages said sales of their Famicom remakes were satisfactory and that they'd be interested in developing a new title in the series, the chances of that seemed extraordinarily low. Outside of Japan, this series is one of the most obscure Nintendo offerings. Would it really be worth Nintendo's while to make a new one? Well. On the 10th of July, Nintendo uploaded a mysterious, creepy video to their YouTube channel. The title read Emio, and the description was just, "Who is Emio?" The only other piece of information was an age rating. 18 in Europe, M in America, 15 in Japan, 15 plus in Australia. The New Zealand rating specified violence, cruelty. All of that is pretty shocking for a Nintendo game. Fans round the world racked their brains to figure out what this Emio video could mean. Was this a new horror game series? A brand new Fatal Frame game, perhaps? It was a mystery. But 1 week later, Nintendo revealed the truth. It was actually a brand new entry in the Famicom Detective Club series, Emio, the Smiling Man. According to Yoshio Sakamoto, after working with Mages on the remakes, he and his team felt inspired to make a brand new title. And just like the first two Famicom Detective Club games, Sakamoto himself would be in charge of the game's story, script, and more. He and Mages would develop a true successor to those original two titles. As a side note, Sakamoto referred to this as the first new game in over 30 years, but Lost Memories in the Snow came out only 27 years ago. None of the promotional material for Emio acknowledges that Satellaview detective game, which certainly implies that Sakamoto had little involvement with it. Anyway, for this new game, Sakamoto dove right into development. I did everything from the plot to the script and the cutscenes, even all the smaller details, he said. The game closely follows in the footsteps of Mage's previous remakes. It uses the same animation style, the UI looks similar, the voice cast of Utsugi, Ayumi, and the protagonist are also all unchanged. As for the story, well, Sakamoto had 3 decades to think it up. He said, "We implemented a daring plot not used before. It expresses what I wanted to portray very directly, so the ending in particular might be divisive for some people." This new game is set to launch on August 29th, 2024. It remains to be seen how people react to this brand new entry in a long, dormant series. Personally, I'm really excited to play Emio. Clearly, I wouldn't have made this long video about the series if I didn't care about these games at least a little bit. I love detective games like Ace Attorney, Professor Layton, Zero Escape, and so on. So having Nintendo throw their hat back into the ring is so exciting. And to partner up with Adventure Game Royalty, well, I feel confident that this new game is going to turn out great. Thanks so much for watching this video. I didn't expect this to be quite so long, so thank you for sticking with me to the end. If you enjoyed and want to help me make more videos like this one, then supporting my channel over on Patreon is a huge help. That allows me to spend more time on individual videos without stressing so much about ad revenue. A huge thanks to all of my $10 supporters: Alison Withernall, Brandon Pimental, Brett and Eric, Candy Crystal, Cyprian Eov, Daryl Gero, Ellie Birnbaum, Evan Kinney, Hi There and Bye, J.E., Jim Gilsonen, Kieran Chan, Kelly Wright, Lucas Little, Michael Gunter, Skate or Pie, and Thomas Söderland.